Today is Thursday, June 5th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Are corporations finally bailing on Pride Month? We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating. You can email us your thoughts as well. Our email address is quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. And joining me now to get through the news of the day, CBN's Billy Hallowell. A lot to get to, as always, Billy. On the focus story, what are we taking a look at?
We're talking about this case out in California. Cathy Miller, she's a baker, and she has been held up on essentially charges for not making a cake for a same-sex wedding. So we'll get into that case and what's going on.
Yeah, amazing that this is the sort of thing that's still being dragged into courts after what we saw with Jack Phillips, but still happening. We'll have the details on that on the focus story. On the main thing, did Chinese researchers at the University of Michigan try to smuggle a biological weapon into the U.S.? We'll have the details on the main thing. Don't forget to subscribe to all of our CBN News podcasts, including Billy's Newsmakers podcast. Trey's just launched Faith in Culture. And of course, Abigail Robertson's podcast, Heaven Meets Earth. You can find the links to all of those podcasts in the description of this podcast episode. All right, we're going to head now to the news in 90 seconds. And Greta Thunberg is sailing to Gaza, joining a pro-Palestinian flotilla, claiming it's for humanitarian aid. Israel is warning it may act, citing the long documented history of such flotillas being used to smuggle weapons or support Hamas. The IDF said they're prepared to defend Israeli waters, as previous flotillas have deliberately provoked naval blockades under the guise of aid. Critics say Thunberg's stunt is dangerous virtue signaling, ignoring the fact that Hamas is a terror group that exploits aid and civilians. One Israeli official summed it up: "This is not activism, it's complicity with terror." And the White House says it will not recognize June as LGBT Pride Month. Instead, the Department of Education is dubbing June Title IX Month to honor women's educational rights and reverse Biden-era changes. GOP lawmakers want to go further, proposing a resolution to make June Family Month, criticizing Pride celebrations as harmful to traditional values. And retailers are quietly scaling back Pride promotions after major backlash hit brands like Target and Bud Light. A new survey shows nearly 40% of companies are pulling back on Pride engagement amid pressure and boycotts. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out those stories and more over at cbnnews.com. And Billy, taking a look at those numbers are kind of stunning. I don't know if you've noticed this in your feeds as well. I still see some of it on the sports teams, and I see them changing their logos to the rainbow flag and such. But it does feel like less this time around.
Yeah, I think people are exhausted from it. You know, it's like, it's this thing where, okay, if you're going to go and support something, that's your right to do it. But when everybody is made to support, like you go to the bank and you can't go to the teller without seeing a giant, flag behind the teller, it just becomes overwhelming. And I think because of the shifts we've had politically, that we're actually seeing people tire of it and move on. And maybe they wanted to move on before, but they felt like they couldn't. Now they have permission to. Yeah.
And especially I remember early on, probably 15, 20 years ago or so, when the LGBT movement was initial in its early stages, let's say. And people would talk about, well, what is this going to lead to? And they say, oh, you're just bringing out the slippery slope. Now we look at all these years later, and you have men saying they're women. You have minor attracted persons are trying to normalize that. Clearly, the slope is real, and we're way down that slide. We've gone pretty far on that path. And so when you have people that were warning about that, and you see where we are now, you got to realize it's been 20 years. We've had a whole generation of people that have grown up with this. They can't say anything. You can't call someone out when you see like a 6'5" offensive lineman-sized guy trying to say, call me ma'am, and you're not allowed to say anything. Growing up in that, I think the pendulum feels like it's kind of swung and people have said enough.
Yeah, well, it's also people are willing to be uncomfortable a little bit, but then there's a point where you're like, okay, I was willing to tolerate your insanity, and now that it's oppressive and it's making me uncomfortable, and now when I'm being punished for it, which we're going to talk about a story in a little bit about punishment, then you sort of say, okay, no, we can't do this anymore. And I do think this is kind of a little bit of the Trump effect, too, because he says whatever comes to mind. Yeah. And I think whether people like him or not, or agree with him or not, there's something that kind of opens other people up to saying the truth suddenly. That can be a bad thing or a good thing. But I think in this case, it's a good thing that people are like, you know what, I'm not afraid to actually say what I think on this. I'm going to do it with grace and love, but I'm going to speak the truth. And so we're seeing more and more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we'll keep an eye on it at cbnnews.com and faithwire.com. All right, we are going to take a look at our focus story now for today. And Billy, as we mentioned there at the top, a California baker remains in court fighting for her religious rights. Tell me the latest on this story.
Yeah, this is a crazy story. We talked with her attorney, Adele Keim, and she is with Beckett. And so that's a religious liberty law firm. Now, we have covered this story many times because this has been going on now since 2017. It's Cathy Miller, and she's the owner of Tastries Shop in Bakersfield, California. The latest move in her case, and again, it's 8 years in the courts, is that the California Supreme Court has declined to hear her case. She lost the last round, which means that them declining to hear her case makes the loss stand. So that leaves them with very few options. They only have one option legally moving forward. And again, the fact that this woman has been going through this for literally 8 years, and she's this, I've interacted with her. She's very kind, woman of faith, Christian, who simply wants to stand by her religious liberty and religious views and has been deprived of that ability.
You said this has been going on for quite some time now. How did this thing start in the first place?
So her attorney explained that, she's always been a creative person. She's done a lot of different things. She's been a wedding planner. She used to teach at a Christian school, and her dream was always to have this custom bakery. And so when she launched the bakery a while back, it was around the time that marijuana was legalized. She started having customers say, hey, we want, weed brownies. They wanted sexual themes on their cakes, and she just wasn't comfortable doing that. And she said she had to come up with a set of standards. And so she came up with something she called her design standards. And this goes back way before this started. So she wouldn't do grotesque Halloween themes, adult themed products. She wouldn't do anything celebrating divorce or gay marriage. Anything that she felt violated her religious, viewpoints and beliefs, her biblical viewpoints. In 2017, there was a couple who had come in, a same-sex couple. They requested a wedding cake, and she politely, according to her, recounting what happened, she politely declined. What's interesting about Cathy, and not every baker had been doing this, even when she declined same-sex couples, she would say, hey, there's another baker who is willing to do it. You can go over to them. I'll give you their information. So she was actually referring them on to try to be helpful. I'm not going to do this, but I do have a friend who does do it, and you can go over there. But apparently the couple in question in 2017, they ignited a firestorm on social media. They were not happy with the fact they were declined, and it went from that firestorm on social media into all sorts of phone calls, media attention, and that was the start of the government getting involved. The government essentially, suing her and saying, look, she was being persecuted by the government. They felt that she wasn't doing the right thing. She was violating their non-discrimination laws, and that is where this all started.
Yeah, that is unbelievable that this is even a thing. And it continues to happen. What other struggles has Cathy had on this front?
So you've got the California Civil Rights Department going after her, right? And she has had victories. This is important to note. She's had, I think, at least 2 court victories, and they appeal it every time. So she wins, and then the state goes after her again. But not just the legal battle, which obviously threatens her business and is very stressful. She has had people, and this was shocking to hear, really from her attorney, who call threatening to rape her, threatening to all sorts of things against her. And this has been something that her attorney said every time the state files a brief or says something, these phone calls start back up. People, all sorts of horrific, attacks against her and her staff. And that has been relentless for 8 years. So you picture not only the legal part of it, feeling like the government's going after you, but now you have people threatening you, saying, I know what you're wearing right now. Just really horrific things. This is what I think should happen to you. So she's dealing with all of that, but has not backed down in any of this.
Yeah, and this really feels like it's similar to the Jack Phillips case. It really feels vindictive, especially when you're saying here she's willing to go ahead and refer to somebody else. So there's no harm, no foul here. We won't do this, but here's a place that will. Where is your obstruction to getting the services you need? And this is really the thing that frustrates me in these type of cases, Billy, is that they try to claim, and I think this is why they keep losing in court, they try to claim they're being denied service because they're gay. That is not what is happening. Because if a gay person asked for something different that didn't violate one of her beliefs that she laid out there, she'd absolutely serve it to them.
And she does serve and employ all sorts of different people. That's important to know. Another couple had come. She declined. They were fine with it. They remained customers after. So, and by the way, I have to mention this because the big development is that they are going to the Supreme Court. They're asking the Supreme Court to hear this case. And so that will be something that we probably hear about. I think in August they have to file, and early next year we will know if the court will hear this. Keep in mind, the Supreme Court has heard two other cases, one involving Jack Phillips out in Colorado, and another one, 303 Creative, which was a huge victory. Both of those involved wedding vendors. The Supreme Court's spoken on this twice. California apparently has not gotten that memo.
Yeah. So it seems like this one is destined to fail, but they're bent on pushing it anyway. Like I said, it feels very vindictive, but I'm sure you'll keep us updated on that story, Billy. Appreciate you bringing it to the podcast today. All right, we're going to go to the main thing now. And as I mentioned at the top, there is a lot of speculation. There's a lot of concern about some Chinese researchers and just what were they doing? Were they trying to smuggle a biological weapon into the U.S.? So CBN's Raj Nair has more on that for today's main thing.
Did Chinese researchers at the University of Michigan try to smuggle a biological weapon into the United States? Well, Sean Durns, a Washington, D.C. based foreign affairs analyst, joins us now. So, Sean, you've written extensively about China. What can you tell us about this wild story?
Well, it does seem to be the case, and of course, the investigation is ongoing, but the suspects have been arrested. That two individuals were trying to smuggle a biological pathogen into the United States. And this was via the University of Michigan, as you noted. It's a very disturbing and troubling development. And we take a look at what happened several years ago with COVID and with China. One can only imagine these sorts of things being weaponized by the Chinese government.
So FBI Director Kash Patel told Fox News, quote, "This case is a sobering reminder that the Chinese Communist Party continues to deploy operatives and researchers to infiltrate our institutions and target our food supply, an act that could cripple our economy and endanger American lives." So, Sean, how serious of a threat is this?
It's extremely serious. Raj, one thing that I think that many Americans might not be aware of is that during the Cold War, there were numerous Soviet spies that weren't unmasked until after the Soviet Union fell. Indeed, some of them were never unmasked. And this wasn't just in the United States. This was in Western Europe. If the Soviets were capable of doing this and having spies here, what were known as illegals even, who would stay here for decades undercover, and not just here in America, this is something that conceivably the Chinese Communist Party can and is doing as well.
So what was the goal of this, to release this into the United States and to cause panic, to cause disease and death? What were they trying to do?
That's a great question, and I wouldn't want to speculate. But one thing that this really does highlight, as FBI Director Kash Patel noted, is the danger that China poses. China is the preponderant challenge that we face. It is our sole-pacing challenge, which is to say China's capabilities are vastly greater than the Soviet Union's were. They dwarf Nazi Germany, they dwarf Imperial Japan, and numerous other American foes that we fought previously. China's industrial power is considerable. They're engaged in a massive military and naval buildup, a massive nuclear buildup. And as we see here, there is very troubling evidence that Chinese actors are engaged in potential acts of sabotage on American soil and elsewhere. And there's a long history, I should note, too, of China doing exactly this sort of thing. There was an analyst named Alex Josk, an Australian analyst, who wrote about this, wrote about Chinese spies and what is known as the United Front, which is basically how China weaponizes its intelligence, and it does so. They're very, very clever. So this is something they infiltrate universities, they infiltrate corporations. They've been caught in the military, the United States military. So it's a real problem, Raj.
So let me maybe take one step back from like the interview feeling and just have like a conversation with you, because I feel like a lot of people are like, okay, China, like everyone relax. They're not actually doing this. They're not infiltrating our college campuses. You guys are kind of overblowing this thing. But as someone who has spent a lot of time researching and writing about this, to my friend here who's watching, is this really happening? Is the Chinese Communist Party actively infiltrating all of these institutions?
Yes. Yes, they are. In a short, brief answer, there has been longstanding Chinese presence, Chinese Communist Party presence at Western universities. In fact, this goes back decades. One of the really, arguably, the first spy master of the Chinese Communist Party got his start on French universities in the 1920s. So this would be 2+ decades before Chinese Communist Party came to power in China. So they actually have their origins at universities in the West. Namely, at that period of time, this was in France, later on in Hong Kong, which was then administered by the British, and ever since. So this is a long-standing issue. They have a track record of doing precisely this sort of thing, and they have the skill set.
So, Sean, you wrote an article for the Washington Times titled, here it is, China is preparing for war. So, Sean, that is quite the statement. What can you tell us about this?
Unfortunately, the lights are blinking. We have real reason to suspect that China is preparing for war. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has been adamant that he intends to seize Taiwan one way or the other. He has explicitly not ruled out force, and he has called for the People's Liberation Army of China to be ready to conduct an invasion by 2027. And we've had numerous American military commanders, notably in the Indo-Pacific, who have warned that those capabilities are there, that the Chinese military is ready to conduct such an invasion now. They're building hospitals underground. They have built their equivalent of the Pentagon, which is multitudes larger, and they're hardening their air bases in the Pacific, which is something you only do if you expect you're going to be in a war. There's a lot of lights blinking red right now, Raj.
Okay, so maybe lastly, I think for folks, here in the United States, it's a lot easier to contextualize a regime like the one in Tehran, the Iranian regime, that just seems like crazy fanatical, like let's build nuclear weapons and destroy the Jewish state. It's like the great Satan. It's like, okay, calm down. We understand you. Or right. The Islamic State, and I get it. You guys are fundamentalists who just want to kill everyone, and I can kind of contextualize that. Or the Houthis in Yemen, like you're firing ballistic missiles at Israel, or I can understand a lot of these different things. But China just seems like this kind of I guess it is an anomaly. It's like this. I almost don't want to believe that China is marching the world, I guess you could say, towards World War III. But in your estimation, how seriously should we be looking at China from an American standpoint?
Extremely seriously. Extremely seriously. And fortunately, that's something that this administration is doing, I should note. There has been policymakers have been belated in waking up to the threat that China poses. And so is the press. It's not just, and it's been a bipartisan problem to recognize that China is rising, it's threatening, it's a malign actor, and that there's the potential for real conflict with a real peer challenger in the Indo-Pacific, and as you noted, potential for war. Unfortunately, we need to be frank about this so we can prevent just such an occurrence. But this administration has several people that they've nominated that are extremely capable. They've been very clear. You have Elbridge Colby, who's the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. So he's one of the chief policy advisors to Secretary of Defense Hegseth. Just the other day, his deputy, Alex Vilas-Green, was nominated. These are very capable people that have been writing and warning about the threat that China poses and how we need to prevent any conflict with China. So the good news is that there are very capable policymakers that are in office. The president's been extremely clear about this as well, as has Secretary of Defense Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So the good news is that we're here. We got people that are in charge that are aware of the problem and the threat. The bad news is that threat has been brewing, and it's been brewing, and we didn't recognize it.
All right, Raj, appreciate you breaking that story down for us. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing. And we're going to take a look at Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction. And coming on the heels here of President Trump basically saying he wants to cancel Pride Month, this is the reason why pride is basically the root of all other sins as well. I mean, basically any sin you can name basically starts with pride. And so we really shouldn't be celebrating it. And this is what this scripture is teaching us.
Yeah, I mean, humility matters. And I think I'll just leave it there. I mean, that is at the end of the day, the idea that we're praising a word that has such a diabolical meaning in scripture is troubling.
Yeah, it really is. All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, and that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back tomorrow with more. God bless. We'll see you then.